let's talk about emotional intelligence. I think of it as learning how to be human, learning how to embrace and accept our humanity. When you think of what sets us apart from, let's say, a robot or some AI device or, even some animals, what sets us apart is obviously our thinking capacities and cognitive abilities, all of that, sure, but it's that we have feelings and we have the self-awareness that we can be aware that we're experiencing those feelings, and then we can communicate with others. We can sense their feelings. We can share those with each other, right? There's a consciousness there and this connection that happens between my feelings and your feelings, and the connection of the two. I think of emotional intelligence as a way of learning how to embrace our humanity. And it might sound funny, but for the longest time in my life, I was denying a big part of my humanity. And I think a lot of us actually do this when we're not actually taught how to embrace and live with our feelings. Give you a quick story. Not until the past few years have I really learned how to feel. And what I mean by that is I grew up in a household where I was raised by parents who also were not taught how to feel. My mom is a child of a World War II survivor from Germany. My grandma, also born in Germany. And my dad was raised in foster care. So you can imagine these weren't necessarily secure, homey, healthy attachments early on. There's a lot of trauma from the get-go. So my parents didn't learn how to deal with feelings. So of course they couldn't teach me how to feel feelings. So what that actually looked like for me is, as a kid, I only really allowed myself this much variance in terms of how I can feel on a given day. And basically what's allowed is just being okay, right? There's no room for being angry, right? Like that's too far off this side, and I would either feel ashamed for it or guilted for it, or like somehow like that wasn't allowed. People didn't know how to deal with that. So it's like, no, right? Can't be angry, push it down. And also like can't be really sad either. Like, again, pushing that down, right? So it's like, I'm not allowed to feel this full breadth of what it is to be a human, right? All these different colors of emotions. It's like my window was very narrow. And I didn't realize how much I was stuffing down because it just became normal. My parents divorced when I was 5 or 6 years old. And as a kid, me, my two brothers, right, I had a lot of feelings about it. I was heartbroken. I missed my dad. All of a sudden he wasn't around. And it was very confusing, right? As a kid, all of a sudden, everything's changing. I wasn't allowing myself to be human, even from a very young age. I wasn't allowing myself to be sad or to be angry. I just had to be okay. So narrow of a view, it's almost robotic, right? Fast forward into growing up, adulthood, right? I ended up in a relationship that was very emotionally abusive. When you play the story out, it's like, oh, no wonder you ended up there, because it's normal. It was normal for me to be around people who weren't emotionally intelligent or weren't emotionally, available or vulnerable. So, I would gravitate towards people who also had this very narrow view. So if I'm feeling something's off, it's because there's something wrong here. Not something wrong with the relationship or the dynamic, but something wrong with me. And I internalized this for almost 8 years that we were in a relationship. And just to show you the extent of where emotional intelligence, the lack of emotional intelligence can lead us is, I ended up in a very toxic relationship for years and years, to the point where at the end of it, I had no self-worth, no self-esteem. I had no self-confidence. I was being manipulated. I was being told some like very mean things about myself that I started to believe, right? That I'm not smart, or that I'm not funny, that I'm not attractive, that I should just be grateful that I have this relationship because I'm that messed up, in a sense, is like how I internalized it. And it's because, again, right, like I wasn't allowing myself to feel the feeling of, wow, I feel hurt that you said that. And I'm going to do something about it to protect myself and protect my environment. Anything that I felt outside of that range, I felt like was something wrong with me. Not until that relationship ended and, came crashing down did I really take the time to learn about this and learn about myself and how, whoa, like this whole breadth of human emotions is actually healthy for us. And it's not my fault. I was never taught, but now I can learn. And that's why it's so important for me to teach whatever I've learned with you. I want to take you through a little bit of just a primer in terms of like how you might be able to boost your emotional intelligence and just like a very 101 entry course, so to speak. When I think of emotional intelligence, there's some element of awareness. So that awareness applies within myself. Like I have to be aware of what I'm feeling. And I also have to be aware to have good relationships. I have to be aware of what energy and what emotions are coming from somebody else that I might be communicating with or in a relationship with or interacting with, right? I can sense that and I can also be aware of where I'm at. So it's a dual process that goes on here. The problem is a lot of people don't want to look inside. And until we can look inside, it's hard to really see very clearly what's going on outside. It's almost like if you're in your car and you have a dirty windshield, it's going to be hard to see clearly what's actually on the other side until you clean your windshield. So where I start is with internal. I'm going to walk you through a couple exercises. You can do this with me, even here watching. And these might seem small, but if you can bear with me, right, and give yourself a few minutes here to like really give this a shot, you might be surprised at what it opens up for you on an emotional level. So let's go ahead and start. This is a nice exercise I like to do with a lot of my clients. Let's think back on the last month. So the last 30 days, whatever day today is, think back on the last month and think of one thing that you're really proud of yourself for. Doesn't matter how big, how small, but one thing that you feel proud of yourself for. Doesn't matter if somebody else thinks it, proud of yourself for. Maybe it's a challenge that you overcame. Maybe it's something you did that like you didn't really want to and like you pushed yourself. Maybe it was just showing up for something that was hard for you, even if nobody else knew it. I'm going to give you a second here and think about it. What's one thing that you're proud of yourself for from the last month? Let me know when you've got it. Okay. So you've got that, right? So for me, just to give you an example, my small thing from the past 30 days is I booked a flight that I've been pushing off booking for weeks and weeks and months. I'm a procrastinator at heart, and I finally forced myself to sit down and book these flights. And I'm always afraid I'm not getting the best deal, and should I wait and this and that. So the fact that I just sat down and I got it done, proud of myself for that. Okay. So just sit with that for a second, right? Notice how you feel towards yourself, what it feels like to be proud of yourself in that moment. Notice if it's maybe uncomfortable. If some part of you is like, no, that's so small. I don't deserve to be proud of that. Like just notice that, right? It's almost like a meditative practice here of just observing what's going on in your body. Okay. So we're gonna kind of add weight to this exercise. Imagine like we're lifting some weight. We're gonna add a little bit more weight here and see what else we can learn about ourselves and our muscles, if we can make them grow a little bit. Okay, so we have something from the last month. So let's think back to the last week. What's something in the last week that you are really proud of yourself for? Let me know when you've got it. Give you another second. By the way, if you hear some snoring, we got my dog Luca in the back. So that would be her. Okay, so from the last week. So notice, was that a little bit harder? Or was that a little bit easier for you? For most people, it's a little bit harder because it's like getting more constrained and it's like last week, nothing special happened last week. But if you're really forced to look and say, no, 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 you have to pick something from the last week that you're proud of yourself for. It doesn't have to be big. For instance, for me, this past week, I went to the gym more often than I normally do. I normally go 3 times a week. This week, I went 5 times. And it's not a big deal. It's not earth shattering. And I don't want to, I don't need to announce it to everybody, but that could be a little thing that, I'm proud of myself for. So just notice that, right? And feel that feeling of like, good job. Yeah, maybe my default was this one thing, but I took an opportunity to grow, even if it's just that 1%, right? I just did something just a little bit difficult, a little bit challenging. I embraced a little bit of struggle, and it's good to feel some pride about that. I can feel proud of myself for it. Now, you may be noticing, if you have a loud inner critic, you may be noticing it come online here and say, yeah, but you should have been doing that all the time. And start to beat you down here. You should have been doing that. Why did it take you so long to do that? Most people already do that. It's not a big deal, right? Or whatever, right? And just notice, right? That like the second that you want to give yourself an acknowledgement of something you did well, maybe there's an inner critic that's like trying to just beat you and pull you right back down. If that's you, just know that you're not alone. That's very common for many of us. And what I'll ask you to do is let's just be aware of that inner critic voice. Let's just take a couple deep breaths. We don't need to argue with it and get defensive about it. We can just accept that there is a judgmental voice in our heads, and maybe it's not ours, right? But there is a judgmental voice that has a hard time accepting this, and that's okay. We're going to give that space to say like, okay, like, thank you for sharing. In 12-step groups, we do this a lot, where we go around in a circle, and when someone finishes sharing, no matter what they just shared, we say, thank you for sharing, right? And it's a way to just say like, okay, like, I hear you, and we're moving on to the next person, right? So I hear you, inner critic, that you feel like that's not enough, that I should have been doing 5 days a week all this time. Okay, thank you for sharing. And then come back to, and it's okay. It's okay to be proud of myself for that, right? If we keep beating ourselves down, you can imagine, right? It doesn't encourage much growth. It just always makes us feel like we're behind. Imagine a kid, imagine a kid, and a lot of us, by the way, learn this from childhood, right? Imagine a kid who comes home and finally gets a high score on their tests, and the parents like, yeah, why did it take you that long? You should have been doing that all along. How would you feel towards that kid in that moment? What do you think they're feeling? Yeah, they're probably just like feeling really deflated, and just like they probably don't even want to bring up anything good that they do to their parent, because it's like never going to be enough, and it's just like really deflating, right? Now, what would you say to that kid if, yeah, maybe the grades haven't been that great, but this time they did a good job, it's an improvement? What would you say? You'd probably be encouraging, right? Like, hey, you worked really hard on that. And yeah, maybe for other people that comes easy, and they have an easy time the whole way, but you worked hard, and I'm proud of you. Good job. Let's keep going, right? That's another thing. A lot of times people think like, if we have a moment of feeling proud of ourselves, we're going to like take the foot off the gas and stop trying to improve or progress. Imagine that kid, right? If that kid like really had that moment of feeling connected and acknowledged for doing a good job, do you think they're going to want to just slack off, or do you think they're going to want to have that feeling again? Like, wow, I'm going to work hard again. Maybe I could do even better. Right? So somehow we forget this logic and this kind of common emotional intelligence, common sense almost. We forget it when we're adults because we're very harsh critics of ourselves, which is why it's helpful to think about somebody else a lot of times. So you have your thing that you're proud of from the last 7 days. Good job. Good job. Let's try one more time. Okay. We're going to add a little bit more weight to this bicep curl of emotional intelligence that we're working on here. And what I want you to think about is when you look at just the past 24 hours, when you look at the last 24 hours, maybe it's been a normal day, nothing extraordinary. That's okay. But I want you to find one thing that you're proud of yourself for. Doesn't matter how small. Think about it. Take your time until you find something where there is something. So if you're having a hard time, if this is a little bit of a struggle, that's okay. Let's go through that struggle, right? Of like, I don't know if I can lift it. Let's keep going, keep going. I know you got this. Think of something small. One thing you're proud of yourself for in the last 24 hours. It's there. It's there. We just have to look for it. Don't give up on yourself here. Doesn't matter how small. All right. How'd you do? Do you got something? So for me, a couple things come to mind actually. For me, I've done this a lot, so it's a little bit easier to get in touch with that for myself. So for me, I didn't sleep that much or that well last night, and I still woke up early today to fulfill some commitments that I had and to still make it to the gym early. And I'm proud of myself for that because my default is to sleep in and to use an excuse. And sometimes I need that, but today I pushed myself and I'm proud of myself. I'm happy I did that. Yeah. Yeah. So notice, was this one hardest for you to do? Was this one harder than the other ones? For a lot of people, that is the case. If that's the case for you, just know you're not alone. And that often it's the hardest because it's almost like we're getting closer and closer to like this us that we exist as right here, right now. It's like, whoa, I really have to confront me here. Like, I'm allowed to be proud of myself, like here in the last day, like, whoa. So it's normal. It's normal if this is a little bit difficult, but it's a good thing to reflect on here. Imagine if I had said, instead of for each of these things, what's one thing you're proud of? Imagine I said, what's one mistake that you made, or one thing that you screwed up, one thing that you could have done better over the last month, over the last week, over the last day. I'm sure you can tell me 15 million things, just rapid fire, right? And the positive takes a little bit more effort, a little more digging, because those grooves, those pathways in our brain are not as familiar to us. We haven't practiced doing that so much. So part of the practice here is to, again, it's like a bicep curl, right? The more that we do an exercise like this, even if it's just after the end of every day, right? What's one thing I can, be proud of myself for, and give myself that and allow it, right? It's okay, right? The inner critic's going to speak and you're going to say, thanks for sharing. And I am proud of myself here, right? Like this is something that was hard for me. It doesn't matter if anyone else recognizes it. The more we can do that, the more grooved those pathways become in our brain. And the more we use it, the more common of a default it'll become for us. You can imagine, right, if we're used to looking at the negativity, no wonder it comes up like that. And we can have the same thing happen with these positive feelings towards ourselves. So that's just one example of how we can start to develop a little bit more awareness and allowing some space inside of us. Because a lot of times, in terms of the emotional intelligence, in that very small window that we allow for feelings for ourselves, is very small, with either just being okay or like very self-critical and judgmental. Like that's all that can fit in that narrow space. And what we're doing right now is we're intentionally widening that space a little bit by saying, there's also room for these positive feelings towards myself. That's okay. That doesn't make me like egotistical or like a jerk or like, a cocky, person or anything like that. Like, no, that's just a healthy reaction to something that we've done that was hard for us, right? We could be proud of ourselves. So that's what we're doing here, is like stretching out just a little bit so that we can feel different things. If you have ever gone through heartbreak, if you have gone through grief in one form or another, experienced some loss, most people have, you've probably experienced this other side of the emotional chasm, which is this deep sadness and loss and grief. And that's also a side of emotional intelligence that's really hard for a lot of people to sit with. Because again, especially as a society today, we're very just, hey, be happy, go lucky, think positive, you should be grateful. People have it so much worse than you do. It could be worse. So it's almost like we're not giving ourselves space, where we don't allow ourselves to feel any negativity because we feel like we always have to be in this space. When in reality, the human experience involves all of this, right? It involves grief. It involves sadness, depression, loneliness. It involves pride and joy and excitement and maybe anxiety and optimism and fear. All of these things are what makes us human. None of these feelings are bad or good. They're all just experiences telling us about what's important to us. They're teachers for us. The only thing is, we don't often listen to them. We just immediately kind of stiff arm it and say, I don't want to hear from you, fear. Get away. Instead of holding space and being able to have the emotional intelligence to say, again, breathing through, I'm feeling very fearful about this new move that I'm making in my life, for instance. And and it's because there's a lot of uncertainty. And then we can realize and have some self-compassion of like, it's very human of me to be a little bit afraid of the unknown. That's a human experience. And I don't have to beat myself up for being afraid. I can, again, imagine that young kid who is afraid of what's under their bed. If you were raised in a dysfunctional household, right? If you complained or said something to your parents, right? I'm afraid of what's under the bed. They might just say like, there's nothing to be afraid of, go to bed. Right? So it's like, push it down, right? It's like, okay, they're telling me that this fear isn't valid. So let me just, right? Force it down. But that fear is real for us. The feeling is real. Even if the story we're telling ourselves isn't real, right? Maybe there is no monster under the bed, but the feeling is very real. It's in our body. It's in our nervous system, right? If we put ourselves in an MRI, a brain scanner, you can see our body is reacting in fear, right? We're tensed up. We have our fight or flight activated, right? It's not just in our head. It's just in our whole body. And the key here is then how to regulate those feelings. Because sometimes we do react to stories that aren't necessarily true or that don't require that reaction. So an emotionally intelligent response from, let's say, that parent or that caregiver to that kid would be to go to them and say, hey, what's going on? And the kid might say, I'm really afraid there's a monster under my bed and I'm afraid it's going to eat me. And they might say, wow, that sounds really scary. That sounds really scary. Maybe let me check under the bed. What if I check under the bed to make sure that you're safe, right? Like, would that help you feel a little bit a little bit more safe, a little bit more secure here. And they might be like, I'm scared if you even go check, but okay, like you're more brave than me. And maybe you actually go under the bed, right? And and you go into the bed and you say, huh, okay, like coast is clear. It's all safe here, right? And you're saying like, hey, that fear, if the thought is that there was a danger, fear is an appropriate response. And we're going to validate that and regulate that. Like, that's okay. It's that the logic didn't make sense. And there's no monster under the bed. So we can slowly and gently and kindly show that actually the fear doesn't need to be there because there is no monster. Again, you can see that takes a little bit more time than just saying, hey, go to bed. But it's those little interactions that let us know that, oh, we can trust our feelings, right? If they're telling us a fear, there's something that we need to be alert of. And there's a way to regulate, right? And we can notice, okay, right? Maybe next time it's like, okay, right? Like Dad said, there is no monster under the bed. He checked last time, and I am feeling fear, but I know it's, you know, it's just like this fear that I have, and it's not real. And then they can regulate a little bit more. Take some deep breaths. And come back to this moment and know that they're okay. Regulating our feelings is something I wish I was taught in school when I was very young, is how to regulate. Because most people today go around their daily lives and they're not regulated. You can just go on the road and see people with road rage. That's unregulated emotions there. In other words, there is no, the emotions take charge. There is no, so to speak, like pilot in charge that's saying like, okay, like there is this feeling here and it's okay. I'm with it, right? Like the feelings just take over and they say, I'm going to feel like this, right? And I'm going to react. It's one thing to feel something, but then to react in a certain way. And people die over road rage all the time because emotionally they have a feeling of anger or of rage in one moment, and they don't have the tools to regulate it and to bring themselves back to a place of calm. So if they were to work on these sorts of things, they would be aware of their triggers, be aware of the cues that cause that rage. And then maybe when someone cuts them off, maybe they pull over and take a couple deep breaths until they're calm again. Maybe they like put on a certain soundtrack or something on the radio that calms them, and well, I guess they're not going to close their eyes, right? But they're right. Sometimes counting, right? So as they're driving, maybe counting. There are all these different regulation techniques. We could probably have a whole other workshop just on those techniques. But the important thing here is that there are ways to regulate it so that our emotions aren't driving us to take actions that we later regret. I'd say that most of the pain that's caused today, whether it's rage or violence or lashing out at each other, these sorts of things are from people who don't regulate their emotions, right? They're feeling something and they just react in the moment. And it's something we do on small scale and on large scale. And it doesn't have to be this way, right? We can learn how to feel feelings and make sure that our prefrontal cortex doesn't go offline where we're just reacting kind of like unconsciously. We can bring our prefrontal cortex back into the equation and say, okay, right, like he just said something that I am very insulted by. And okay, it's not going to do any benefit to just call him a name back. And okay, like maybe I need to remove myself from this situation. Like we can make educated decisions when we're able to be in touch with our own feelings. So notice there's like a whole wealth of discovery and opportunity if we look inward with what is going on inside of us. Again, going back to my story, I wasn't allowing myself to feel any of the feelings that I had in the dysfunctional relationship I was in. In fact, I didn't even realize it was a dysfunctional relationship, because whenever I would have a feeling of this didn't feel right, or this felt a little mean, or whatever it is, I would immediately react in a way that was like pushing it down and judging myself for something I did wrong because I wasn't perfect. And that would be my reaction, is just to stay and, just make up, make things good, as opposed to being able to really sit with it and make an educated decision on, wait, I deserve someone who's going to treat me with kindness and with love and with care, and somebody that I feel safe enough to open up to and communicate with. And as the last segment before we wrap here is about how do we tie this into our connections with other people, right? Once we have some good regulation, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence within ourselves, we can use this in our dynamics with other people. And what this means, I'll give you an example in a romantic relationship, because we see the acting out of unregulated people a lot. Imagine there's a couple and somebody says to the other person, you never spend time with me anymore. You never take the initiative to have us spend time. And like, I just wish you would do better here. Okay, so you can imagine from the other person, they're probably going to feel a little bit attacked here and a little bit defensive. And there's a couple ways that this whole conversation might go, right? If that second person is not regulated, then they're probably just going to fire back. What are you talking about, right? Like, I made time with you yesterday and we went on a date last Friday. And then it's like, yeah, but you were on your phone. And it's like this back and forth dance, this cycle that doesn't actually get anywhere. And then eventually you just get so tired of arguing that maybe you just stop, or you just kind of write it off, but nothing actually gets solved. Now, imagine that there was actually some emotional intelligence in this conversation. And really it takes either person to really like wake us up to like what's being really said here. So let's say that first person, instead of attacking, they were first able to check in with themselves and say, what is it that I'm feeling here? Right? I'm feeling a little angry. And anger is a secondary emotion. So like, what's under that anger? I'm angry because he's not spending time with me. And, when he doesn't do that, it makes me feel alone. Oh, okay. So actually there's like a feeling of loneliness. There's a feeling of like being hurt and being like this sense of like abandonment, right? Like we're supposed to be together, but I feel like you're off doing your thing and I'm doing my thing, right? So if that person has the emotional intelligence to get in touch with what's going on, then they can communicate that in a vulnerable way where the other person's less likely to react defensively. So it might sound something like this. Hey, do you have a second that we can, I wanted to share something with you. And, I'm noticing that I've been feeling pretty lonely lately. And, I've been feeling pretty lonely, and I want to spend more time with you. And, I feel like it would really help if we had like set date nights that I knew that we were going to spend time together. Because right now it's kind of like up in the air, and I want some regularity there. Well, what do you think? That gives the other person to actually come from a caring perspective now and say, oh, like, darling, I don't want you to feel lonely. Like, oh my gosh, right? Like, yeah, I have been really busy with work, and, I think, yeah, that would be good to do that. Maybe I've been feeling like that too, right? It opens up this whole new avenue for connection from a vulnerable place. And that opens up like an intimate bond. And that's beauty. That's really what we're looking for, is a safe place with our partner that we can share what we really feel and have it received with love and with care. And a lot of times what we're doing is we're throwing like our reaction out there. You never do this. And we wonder why they are defensive or reacting, right, the way they do. It's that we need to come with love. And if we're able to come with love and vulnerability, emotional intelligence, and they still react defensively, then there's an opportunity for them, right? Maybe they have some of their internal work to do to be able to get in touch with their feeling of, when I hear you say you feel lonely, I feel like I'm not doing anything right. And I feel like no matter what I do, nothing's like, I feel hopeless, right? Or maybe I feel worthless. And that person would then be able to speak from an emotionally intelligent perspective of, I feel like I'm so afraid that I don't know what I'm doing here, or that it's never good enough for you. And I really want it to be, and I just don't know what to do. And then that person's able to say, wow, like, is that really how you feel? Like, they're able to have then a connection and actually find a place of resolution and connection that actually is stronger after the conflict than before the conflict. This is a problem a lot of people go through, is they have the same conflict over and over again, but it's not actually getting solved. But in an ideal world, right, if two people are regulated and emotionally healthy, these conflicts actually bring you closer together because you're able to be vulnerable and open with them. Now, one quick note, because this was my experience, right, is sometimes you're with a partner who is unwilling to do the internal work on their own, right? So this was my story where my partner would always say what a terrible communicator I am. And this was a little confusing to me because, she would say how bad I am at communicating, but then everywhere else in my life, at work, my friends, everywhere, they're like, wow, like you communicate really well. But the thing is, like, I was, again, like, so twisted in my head that I believed that it was my partner who knew the truth. These people were just trying to be nice. So I believe that actually I was a terrible communicator. And when I look back, I'm able to see that I was not able to communicate in this open and vulnerable way, because whenever I would do that, there would be a reaction, an unregulated reaction of rage, of blame, of manipulation, of gaslighting, which a healthy reaction in that moment would be to kind of cut it off and say, like, this is not healthy for me. Like, if you can't hold space for my feelings in a safe way, like I can't engage in this anymore. That would have been a healthy response, but instead what I did is I just shut down. I shut down and I wouldn't say anything, right? It's no wonder, right? If you're just going to get that reaction, then you're going to bottle it up. So that was what I did. And of course, then there's a lot that's not being said. There would be a lot of passive aggression that comes out. Again, and those are all moments. Passive aggression is a lack of being aware of like what I'm really feeling. Sometimes it just comes out unconsciously, right? That you're really upset and you might actually think, no, I'm not, but you actually are. And it's like, it needs to come out. It needs to come out, and it can come out in a healthy way. And that's at the end of the day, what the emotional intelligence is about, is how do we feel the feelings that come from this experience of being human, which, by the way, none of us has done before. We're all learning this on the fly, right? So we can give ourselves a little bit of grace as well. And so how can we learn how to deal with this? How can we learn how to regulate it and make it work with us and for us, instead of taking control of our lives and having us react and snap into things that we might regret for the rest of our lives? It doesn't have to be that way. And the way that we get better is through these small, intentional efforts of allowing whatever feelings show up. Sometimes that is very difficult to do by yourself, and we need somebody else who can kind of guide us through that and hold space for us and redirect, whether that's a counselor, a therapist, a friend, a coach, a family member, somebody at work that we trust, but it's somebody who can hold space. And sometimes they're able to almost like lend you some of that ability and that courage to just move a little bit outside of that narrow zone, and for you to know that it's okay, right? And not only is it okay, but it's healthy. It's healthy to feel this whole range of feelings. Just because I'm feeling bad one day doesn't mean there's something flawed or something wrong. Like, sometimes I might be doing everything right and I still have a bad day, and that's okay, right? I don't need to self-destruct or anything over it. And there are going to be some days that, I'm feeling really great, and I don't need to beat myself up for those as well. I can be okay with it. I can let myself feel it. And that in itself is sometimes I don't know if people talk about this enough, but sometimes the positive feelings are, Brene Brown talks about this a lot. It's like foreboding. These positive feelings can be so scary for us because they're so unfamiliar. I know for me, I'm actually pretty comfortable with grief today. Like I understand it. I know how to like give myself space and be gentle with myself and know that like, okay, I'm processing a lot. I'm going to be a little more, low energy and sad, and I'm processing things, and it's okay, right? I'm doing right what I need to be doing, right? But that's okay. But sometimes it's actually the joy and the the positive, so to speak, emotions that are really difficult to feel, right? Because again, there might be a knee-jerk reaction to joy. Like, no, don't feel that. Because the moment you feel joy, it means it'll be taken from you, or something's wrong, right? Or something's about to go wrong, or the shoe's about to drop, right? Like, don't be too happy. Like, always stay on guard. And the reality is, the more healthy of a range we can have, the more comfortable we can get with it, the more practice we put into it, the better our relationships with ourselves and the better relationships we have with everyone around us. And this is even just people we see in our daily lives, the cashier, the grocer, strangers, our neighbors. Like they can sense it, right? They can feel it when we are in a regulated place. If you have any questions on this, or if there's anything that you could use some more clarification on, or if you relate with any of this, please drop a comment below. I would love to hear from you. Would love to continue this conversation. Again, if this is live, right, we could have some interactive dialogue, and I would love to ask you, what your proud moments were and like what that feels like for you and all of that. But hopefully you're able to get something just from this, and notice, right, that the different feelings that can come about just from maybe asking yourself some new questions and being able to give yourself a little bit more space. And when we're able to give ourselves space, we're able to give the people around us a little bit of space as well. And that space is a way that we can show love and kindness and generosity. And the world definitely needs more of that today. So if anything I said today, if it resonated, please drop a comment below. And until next time.